Be talking about the biggest stories that matter to you the most. Breaking news, John Calipari is finalizing a 5-year deal to become the Arkansas Razorbacks' next head coach, covering college sports like no one else. The biggest guests in sports. We now welcome in Hall of Famer Jim Calhoun.
Such a pride I had, I came to Connecticut.
The legend, Tim Tebow joins us.
We'll run it back. I like it.
The legend, Herschel Walker. Welcome in, everybody. Sunday night edition, Aaron Torres Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Torres. Hope everybody's doing well. Hope everybody's having a great day. By the way, hope everybody enjoyed the first full Sunday of the NFL slate. We are live here on Sunday night, 7 p.m. Eastern. Most of that second window is officially done. So hope you enjoyed all the NFL. Today on this show, you know what it's about. It's all about college football, baby. So we got a lot to discuss. We got a lot to get into. Thoughts on today's show, pretty straightforward. We will open with the big one, top 10 matchup, Michigan and Texas. I got to call a spade a spade. I think Michigan struggled, but Texas to me might be the best team in college football. I will explain that. From there, talk a little bit about the Notre Dame thing. I don't think it is as big of a deal as some others might. They're struggling. They lose. Oregon struggle. There's a lot of teams struggling right now. Take a quick break. Come back. We will talk Nebraska, Colorado. Matt Rule's program makes a statement. Deion's program is a disaster right now. What does it mean for both sides? And then we'll wrap with what can only be described as a very interesting weekend for the SEC outside of the Texas thing that I just mentioned a moment ago. Tennessee rolls. They look awesome. I got takes on Tennessee galore. But Alabama struggles. How worried should we be about them? And oh, by the way, Kentucky crushing loss. Arkansas crushing loss. Auburn crushing loss. Nothing but pain across most of the SEC. So we're going to go ahead and talk about all of that. Before we get started, a couple quick reminders. Make sure that you are subscribed to the Aaron Torres Pod YouTube channel and the pod itself. YouTube channel, click the subscribe button at the bottom of the screen. New clips, new videos going up every single day. And we are live a minimum of 3 times a week. I think as things get busier, we might be going 4 or 5 times a week. We're reacting live on Saturdays as well. Make sure you subscribe, turn on those notifications because there is a lot to react to. Also, make sure you're subscribed to the podcast feed, Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure if you can, leave a 5-star rating and review. You can follow me on all the social media platforms as well. Aaron_Torres on Twitter, Aaron Torres Pod on Instagram and TikTok. And we do have a Facebook page as well that you can follow. One more reminder before we get started, because we got so much to dive into. Do want to thank our presenting partner, Collie Puffs, ColliePuffs.com. Okay, so here's the bottom line. You already know, but it's football season. You're on the couch for 8, 10, 12 hours a day. You're looking for something healthy for you to eat, for your kids to eat, for your grandkids to eat. I introduce to you Collie Puffs, the alternative to the salty, unhealthy stuff that you're buying at your food aisle right now. Okay, so Collie Puffs, family-owned business, not far from where I am. And the owner of the company, pretty straightforward. 2 small children, said, what can we do? Because my kids are going for the unhealthy stuff. So he created Collie Puffs. They are baked but not fried. They have healthy ingredients, but here's the crazy part. They are absolutely delicious. They sent me a box a few days ago. We tore through them in the Torres household. Me, Mrs. T, a few fell on the floor. The dog gobbled them up. You're going to love them. Your kids are going to love them, and there's nothing else to say. So when you are sitting on the couch, you're looking for something yummy to eat but healthy as well, check out Collie Puffs. Several different flavors. I like the honey barbecue. I like the white cheddar. You can find out more information and order right now. Do your boy Torres a favor. ColliePuffs.com is where you can get them. And oh, by the way, they are also available on Amazon. You may have heard of that website. So when you're on Amazon searching for whatever, old school T-shirts or hats or whatever you're doing, throw some Collie Puffs in the cart. Try them out. You will not regret it. The healthy alternative. Tell them Torres sent you. Appreciate your support. With that said, it is a Sunday night. It is September. There is no more time to waste. Football is in the air. So let's go ahead and get to the topic of the day. And the topic of the day, listen, I think we could start in a lot of different places. We could start with Tennessee dominating. We could start with Nebraska dominating. We could start with Notre Dame losing. But where I want to start, the early game, big noon kickoff, Saturday afternoon, Ann Arbor, Michigan, the Texas Longhorns, the Michigan Wolverines. We previewed it all last week, and I thought Texas was going to win, but I thought it was going to be close. I thought it was going to be competitive. I thought it was going to be low scoring, and I thought we were going to get a game deep into the fourth quarter. Well, as it turns out, it was the exact opposite as Texas took control early, dominated throughout. They win 31-12. But if you watch the game, you don't need me to tell you it wasn't that close. It wasn't that competitive. Texas, to its credit, was head and shoulders better than Michigan. And with it, I just got one question for you guys and girls. Is Texas actually, everyone wants to make the Texas is back comment. No, Texas has been back. Are they the best team in college football right now? Because to me, this is no disrespect to Georgia, Ohio State, whoever. That's the best team that I have seen so far. So let's go ahead and get into this game. 31-12 was the final score. And if you watched any of it, it wasn't even as close as that 31-12 final score would indicate, right? You go back and look. First of all, we all know Texas should have had a touchdown on the opening drive. TD called back. Awful call by the refs, sketchy holding call, whatever. So they should have had 7 on that opening drive. By the way, on top of that, going into halftime, they're up 24-7. They take their foot off the gas, no pun intended, because Steve Sarkisian says all gas, no brakes. Oh, he hit those brakes in Ann Arbor on Saturday afternoon, did not want to embarrass Michigan. And on top of it, Michigan scores their only touchdown with under 2 minutes to go. This was complete and utter domination by Texas. And this was just a game where, listen, I know they made their statement a year ago in week 2 at Alabama. I think they made quite another statement on Saturday in Ann Arbor with this victory. And when I think about this game from the Texas perspective, there are really 3 things that come to mind. The first thing, I gotta give flowers where they're due. I've always liked Quinn Ewers. I don't know that I've ever loved Quinn Ewers. I don't know that I've ever thought that he's like as good as all the recruiting services once said or whatever. But listen, everybody's on their own trajectory. Not everyone's going to start day one like Dylan Raiola. Not everyone's going to be a star day one. But this kid, he went through the ups and downs. Ohio State struggled his first year at Texas. He gets hurt. This kid has developed into what I believe may be the best quarterback in college football, okay? Forget the stats. Forget who's leading the country in passing yards and this and that. Quinn Ewers is just so comfortable and so confident in this Steve Sarkisian offense in his 3rd year with Coach Sark, okay? You watch the game. It just felt like Michigan had a million 3rd down opportunities to get him off the field, and Quinn Ewers just kept making plays. He'd step up in the pocket, find a receiver. He'd step back in the pocket, find a wide receiver. Never nervous, always calm. He takes the short throws if he's got to take them. He throws deep if he's got to take them. It certainly helps that they have a very deep and talented wide receiver core, even if they lost, obviously, A.D. Mitchell and Xavier Worthy to the NFL. Don't think it changes the fact, though, that this kid looks just so confident, so poised, finished 24 of 36 in this game with 3 touchdowns. Second takeaway, listen, that offensive line is the real deal. And we all know, we all do our homework during the offseason. We all knew that Texas on paper had maybe the best offensive line in all of college football. And we all knew, by the way, that Kelvin Banks is going to be the first offensive tackle or offensive lineman from Texas going in the first round of the NFL draft since 2002, something like that. It's been like 20 years. We knew they were good. I mean, they were just excellent. They're just superb. Michigan could not do anything against Texas. Okay. Texas finishes with almost 4.5 yards per carry. Now, admittedly, some of it came on a big run from Ryan Wingo, but 4.5 yards per carry. Quinn Ewers does not get sacked on the game. Michigan only finished with 4 tackles for loss total. That offensive line is so good, moving NFL bodies for Michigan. And again, they just pushed them all around the field, up and down. Michigan didn't even have a shot. finally, let me give credit where it's due. That defense, because, I came into the year. They lost two really good defensive linemen, Tavondre Sweat, Byron Murphy, to the NFL. And I sat there and said, I don't know what to make of this defense. Well, as it turns out, they're just fine. The defense, I thought really the Colorado State game was an eye-opener for me. Colorado State was one of the better offenses in the group of five last year, top 10 passing offense in college football. Texas shut them down in week one and then shut Michigan down on Saturday. Now, I understand Michigan has its issues, and we're going to get to those in a minute. I don't think it changes the fact that if you don't have to be an NFL scout. You don't got to be an expert. Just watch the games. Texas has size, speed, length, athleticism. The transfer from Clemson was all over the field hitting. And they just got dudes that are all NFL dudes, all Sunday dudes that you're going to be seeing on Sundays going forward. And so when I look at that Texas team, I think they are as complete as anybody that I have seen in college football this year. Now, listen, it's the second week of September, whatever it is. It's early. There's a lot of football to be played. But again, you start looking at college football as a whole. Tell me who is as complete of a team as Texas is. The only ones that immediately come to mind, Georgia. We'll see Texas play Georgia at least once this year because we know they play in a few weeks in Austin. Maybe twice, maybe three times, who knows. But Georgia's right up there. Ohio State's obviously good. We'll see what happens when Ohio State plays a real team. But to me, Saturday was just all about Texas. I could go on and on. I could pretend like whatever, and we're going to find out. That's the great thing about a college football season. We can all overreact on September 8th, September 9th, September 12th, September 22nd, whatever. Everything sorts itself out, and it will continue to do so in a 12-team college football playoff. What I will say, though, is you look at that team. They're going to cruise the next couple weeks. They got, I think, UTSA at home next week, so Texas San Antonio, then UL Monroe. They open with Mississippi State before they have a bye. So they open SEC play, I should say, with Mississippi State before they have a bye. That's at home. They should be 5-0 going into the bye before the little bit of a tough stretch where they have Oklahoma on a neutral and Georgia at home. So that mid-October stretch, Oklahoma and Dallas, Georgia in Austin, that's going to tell us what we need to know about this team. But listen, when you start projecting out, you start talking about teams that we expect to be in that 12-team college football playoff, but not only that, teams that are good enough to win it, I think Texas is absolutely one. Listen, I've been a critic of Texas. A lot of Texas fans don't like me, say, oh, Torres always picks on us. You got yourselves a heck of a football team. Credit Coach Sark, dominated on Saturday. A couple quick thoughts on Michigan. So Michigan is interesting, and Michigan is funny because as I'm coming on air, we're just minutes removed from Jim Harbaugh's first win as the head coach of the Los Angeles Chargers. They take care of business against the Las Vegas Raiders. And this isn't an NFL podcast. We don't have to talk Chargers, but the Chargers win was the most quintessential Harbaugh win that you've ever seen. They won the turnover battle. They weren't great along the line of scrimmage, but they had a big run late. Offensive line eventually wore them out. Chargers end up winning. I think that's what's disappointing about this Michigan loss. I don't blame Sharon Moore. And I think it goes without saying, last year was kind of the year for Michigan. 40-whatever seniors. It was built for last year. Everybody I've talked to that knows that Michigan program said that Harbaugh was out one way or the other. He knew last year was the window to win it all. He does. But you look at this team, and it is so obvious they have lost a ton. I don't think it's Sharon Moore's fault. I think even if Jim Harbaugh was there, it was going to be a struggle to maintain what they had a year ago. But you look at this Michigan team, it was disappointing. First off, from the Michigan perspective, they don't have a quarterback. I hate to be a jerk. The Davis Warren story, he's their starting quarterback. If you listen to the broadcast, Joel and Gus did a good job of explaining his backstory. Survived leukemia, walk on, great story. He's simply not good enough. 22 of 33 passing, okay. But if you watch the game, you could tell, he went into spring camp as the third stringer behind Jack Tuttle and Alex Orji. As I've said many times, Alex Orji, it was expected that he was going to win that job. So the fact that he doesn't tells you everything you need to know. He's not ready. He's not good enough. By the way, They keep putting him in short yardage situations when everybody knows he's going to run the football. It's like, listen, I ain't telling somebody how to run their football team, but if your backup quarterback is known as a runner, at some point you got to let him pass the ball so there's at least a threat. And I think he passed the ball a few times against Fresno State, but it doesn't change the fact that whenever he went into the game, it was so obvious it was going to be a run, and it got stuffed every single time by Fresno State. I think beyond just the quarterback, though, what was frustrating to me as a consumer of college football, this was a program that for years was based on the fundamentals, was based on blocking, tackling, pursuit angles, doing the little stuff right. And I thought that defense, listen, part of it is credit to Texas and the roster that Steve Sarkisian's put together. That defense looked lost and confused. And I'm not going to do the week 2 fire the defensive coordinator thing, but they brought Wink Martindale back from the NFL. I'm not an NFL expert, coaching trees, whatever. But Wink Martindale was a guy that NFL offenses kind of figured out. And the last couple of years, it was kind of like, I think this guy's kind of lost his fastball. And if you watch Michigan, it certainly felt like he has. That was a guy that the defense was constantly out of position, constantly didn't know where to go, constantly taking bad pursuit angles, which is simple stuff. There was a play I tweeted out. 4 guys had an angle on a Texas running back. The running back still scored the touchdown anyway because they all took terrible angles. So that's a disappointing thing for Michigan with me. Now, listen, for Michigan, there is a glow from a year ago. I don't think that most Michigan fans, I don't want to say you don't care about this season, but you've beaten Ohio State 3 straight years. You won that national championship. Nobody can ever take that away from you. But I do think this year is going to be a little bit of a struggle. And we'll talk about it with Nebraska in just a minute, because Michigan was a team that I had in the college football playoff because I just sat there and said they're going to get to 10-2. They'll either beat Texas, Oregon, Ohio State, and they'll get to 10-2, and they'll be 10-2, and they'll get in the playoff. Well, if Saturday is any indication, they aren't even close right now. And by the way, I know it's early, but they weren't very good against Fresno State the other night either in week 1. Remember, Fresno State, that was a 16-10 game deep into the fourth quarter. Michigan finishes with 270 yards of total offense, and Fresno State threw the football better than Michigan did. So it's early. You don't want to overreact, and this isn't an indictment on Sharon Moore. I just think the cupboard was pretty empty. You don't have a quarterback, and I was very underwhelmed by the quarterback. So Texas, Michigan is the big one. Really quickly before we take a break and come back and talk Nebraska, Colorado, there is something that I do want to talk about. By the way, the angry Kentucky fans are already in the comment section. I love everything about it. We're going to talk Kentucky later on in the show. Do want to just briefly touch on Notre Dame, because I saw a lot of you tweeting at me, Torres, Notre Dame, what does it mean? What's going to happen? This and that. Think everybody saw, but Notre Dame, of course, lost to Northern Illinois in a game, the final score 16-14. And I think bluntly, there's kind of one of two ways that you can look at this. But when I look at this game, I just have to be completely honest, and I have to call a spade a spade. To me, this is a moment in time where I do think the 12-team college football playoff changes my perspective on this loss. Now, I've talked a lot about the 12-team playoff and how you can't just say, everybody gets to lose games, because I think there have been consequences, and I think there have been things that you see that should have you worried if you're a fan of a team. We talked about it with Florida State in week 0. Remember, Florida State loses in week 0. Everybody says you can't overreact. It's week 0. Florida State will figure it out. It's like, yeah, but they're getting pushed around on the defensive line and they can't block anybody on the O-line. That ain't going to fix itself in a week or a month. Well, they end up losing to Boston College the other night. With Notre Dame, I think you can look at it two ways. Now, if you just want to say Riley Leonard has not been that good as a quarterback and they are going to struggle throughout the year to move the football, it's going to be hard for me to argue with that. Easily could have lost to A&M, do lose to Northern Illinois, in a game where Riley Leonard just isn't good and Notre Dame has 286 yards of total offense. But at the same time, why I can't freak out about Notre Dame is because to me, this is both the gift, but also the curse of a 12-team college football playoff. Because while I think a Florida State loss means something in week 0, LSU losing means something in week 1 because they still have a lot of good teams left on this schedule. it is hard for me to get fired up and start acting crazy about Notre Dame losing to Northern Illinois. To me, you know what this is? This is kind of the college basketballification of college football. Listen, I love college basketball. Anybody who listens to this show knows that I love college basketball. There's no doubt about that. But the problem with college basketball, the reason it doesn't have mainstream appeal is because basically no individual result matters until you get to March. So it's hard for a North Carolina fan to be angry if you lose to North Carolina Wilmington. It's hard for a Duke fan to be angry if you lose to Canisius. I'm just throwing out examples here. That's the curse of college basketball. And that's kind of how I feel about Notre Dame. Yes, maybe the offense is broken and it'll never get fixed. And maybe they finish 7-5. And maybe the A&M loss means nothing. Or maybe look at their schedule. And if they're just good enough on offense, they will still figure out a way to get to 9 or 10 wins. And so you look at that schedule, it's hard to find losses. And if they get to 10 wins, they're going to be in the conversation for the playoff. Now, maybe the schedule isn't good enough. Maybe they're number 13, 14 on the outside looking in, and we look back to Northern Illinois and say that was the loss that really cost them. But the counter to that is, as bad as Saturday was, look at the schedule. At Purdue next week. I wouldn't really be that worried if I was a Notre Dame fan. Miami of Ohio. Now, Louisville, the final week of September, maybe that's a different conversation. Maybe that's where you do get a little bit worried if you are a Notre Dame fan. But the counter to that is if you win a couple of these games, all of a sudden none of it matters. You finish 10-2, you'll be fine. Obviously, listen, I think USC all of a sudden looks like a tougher game on the schedule, but that's not till the final week of the season. So I know everybody wants Torres to freak out about Notre Dame. And oh my goodness, they're terrible. It's over. They're awful. That week one win means nothing. Just hard for me to get worked up about the loss. Because I just think if they play B+ football in basically every game the rest of the year, they're going to be in pretty good shape. All right, so what I want to do, take a quick break, come back. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about that Nebraska-Colorado debacle in Lincoln. Discuss that, what it means for Nebraska, who maybe is a little bit better than we thought. And is Colorado, are we just done with Colorado like as a thing that we talk about? Take a quick break, come back, talk about that. Then we got a lot of SEC football to get into. Quick break, be right back. Before we do, many of you ask me all the time, Torres, what can I do to help support the show? You give me hours and hours and hours of content every single week. What can I do to help you? Well, I'll tell you what, do me a quick favor. Check out the Aaron Torres Media merchandise store for all of your team-specific shirts, hats, and more, all available at aarontorresonline.com/merchandise. A lot of you wondering, Torres, what can I get in that merch store? Well, first of all, we got our brand new Hope and Pope Kentucky basketball t-shirts. That's right. Mark Pope has arrived. He is here to save the day. Get your Hope and Pope t-shirts there. Also, Arkansas fans, the Big Pig Invasion is here. You can get your tees there. Basketball School Alabama shirts. Mora Hurley 2024 UConn shirts for your tailgates at Rentschler Field, your games at the XL Center or Gamble. And oh, by the way, your Mike effing Woodson gear for Indiana. If you love football, we got you covered too. We got more Dion shirts and hats than we even know what to do with. The freeze warning has hit the plains. Auburn fans, grab your freeze warning tees now. And of course, our new era, new rules shirt applies to Nebraska football and its incredible fan base. We have more coming for the fall, plenty in stock right now. So make sure to check out the Aaron Torres Media merch store at aarontorresonline.com/merchandise. And you can always hit me up with any questions. Aaron Torres Podcast Questions @gmail.com. Hey, I'm back. Good to be back. So talk about some of the other big games across college football on Saturday in week 2. And I want to start with a program that we have discussed so many times here on the Aaron Torres Pod and Aaron Torres Pod YouTube channel. And that is the Nebraska Cornhuskers, okay? And if you've listened to this channel, listened to this podcast before, you already know my stance on Nebraska. I am a child of the 90s. When I grew up, Nebraska football was essentially the equivalent of what Alabama was kind of in those early to mid 2010s. Dominant, competing for championships every year, winning for championships every year. And so it goes without saying, we don't need to relitigate history, but it has not been a great couple years. But I've watched that fan base. I have seen how they continue to turn out week after week after week, a sellout streak dating back to the 1960s. And you just say, man, I hope this program gets back to the top of this sport. No fan base deserves it more. Well, I bring it up because I'm not saying that Saturday was the moment where Nebraska is officially back. But what I am saying is you went into this game as a favorite. You went into this game as kind of the darling of college football. People finally starting to see what Matt Rule is building. And you put on a performance that let America know that this program is absolutely trending in the right direction. So I want to break it down. Nebraska wins 28-10 against Colorado. It frankly wasn't that close. I'm going to throw out a take, by the way, at the end of this segment that's going to blow your mind. They get the win. I don't want to oversell it, but you start to look at the landscape of the Big Ten. Could this potentially be, after a dominant win like that with the schedule that they have, dare I say, a dark horse college football playoff contender? I don't think it's crazy, but I don't want to get ahead of ourselves. So let's start with the game on Saturday. Game on Saturday, incredible environment. Again, the youngins finally got to see what all of us have talked about with Nebraska through the years, how great that stadium always is, but especially when they have a good team and a big name opponent coming in. In terms of the game itself, listen, I thought Nebraska, from literally the opening of the game, set the tone. They win 28-10. It was not that close. We all know that. They were up 28-0 at the half. Matt Rule's exact quote after the game was, quote, "It wasn't really a contest in the second half. Colorado, frankly, puts in a touchdown midway through the fourth quarter after the game had long been decided. And it was just a dominant effort, a dominant win. And it just really shows, you get the right coach in the right spot, it can turn quickly, and that appears to be the case for Nebraska. In terms of the victory, I think there are two things that absolutely stood out to me about this Nebraska team that are worth diving into after such a dominant win. The first one, they got dudes on both lines of scrimmage, okay? And listen, I'm guilty of it like everybody else. We talk so much about quarterbacks and Heisman Trophy winning guys, and what about this guy, and this guy's a 5-star, and what about this? And it's like, this is a line of scrimmage sport. It always has been, and I think especially in the Big Ten, when it gets cold in the winter, cold in November, cold in October, you have to have guys on both sides of the football, and that is absolutely what Nebraska has, and it showed Saturday against Colorado. Listen, I know some people don't like Colorado. I felt bad for Shedeur Sanders. He just did not have a chance in this game. Gets sacked the second play of the game, gets sacked the second series of the game on the first play. Colorado, which gave up 1 sack in its first game, gives up 2 in its first 5 plays of the game, and it just never really got better from there. The defense gave in total 10 tackles for loss, 6 sacks on the afternoon. Obviously held Colorado to 25 yards rushing. I know that's a little deceptive, because, of course, sack yards count against your rushing totals, but 16 yards rushing for Colorado. And then on the other side of the football, dominance on the offensive side, or on the offensive line as well. Running backs totaled about 4.5 yards per carry, 150 yards of total offense. And this was a game where, as Matt Rule said, they largely let their foot off the gas, was not competitive, just dominance on both sides of the football. Beyond that, also think it's worth noting, I really liked what I saw from Dylan Raiola. Obviously, the 5-star quarterback, everybody knows his story by now. And I'll be transparent. If you had told me he throws for 185 yards, I probably would have sat there and said, I don't know. What do we make of that? But what I was so impressed by with Dylan Raiola, he's a 5-star quarterback. I think everybody knows, but if you do not, this was the #1 quarterback recruit in America, was committed to Georgia, flips to Nebraska, his uncle coaches there, etc. His dad played there. But I bring it up because what impressed me so much was the confidence and command that he had of that offense. Sometimes when you put in a true freshman, 5-star kid. You feel like you got to play him and you want to let him loose. You want to let him throw the ball deep. You want to let him throw the ball all over the field. And it felt like not only did Nebraska put in a game plan for success, but he executed the game plan. Yes, he quote unquote only had 185 yards passing because he could hand off the ball and his backs were getting 5 yards per carry. He wasn't throwing the ball deep. He took the short throws. It wasn't about him. He didn't have to be great. He knew he didn't have to be great for Nebraska to win. And I just love the confidence that he played with and the confidence of being like, I don't have to be the dude. I don't have to do everything. I got a talented roster around me. I am so impressed by what I saw from this kid. And so Nebraska rolls. And I think beyond that, here's the other crazy part. Nebraska fans, correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think it was a perfect game. I don't think it was the best game you could have possibly played. Now, you dominated. You let your foot off the gas. You did commit 11 penalties. What was it? Let me make sure I have the stats right here. You did commit, 12 penalties, 105 penalty yards. Now, Matt Rule was very adamant after the game. He felt like maybe it was some home cooking from the Big 12 refs. Yes, the game was at Nebraska, but there were Big 12 referees. But it doesn't change the fact that you dominated. The other thing, you took care of the football. Should have mentioned that with Dylan Raiola, because last year this is a team, and Nebraska fans know this, 31 turnovers in 12 games, a minus 17 turnover margin, 0 turnovers for the Huskers. And so when I look at this Huskers team, listen, they are really good. Matt Rule has flipped it essentially in 18 months. And I understand there are steps to this, right? As the kids say, there are levels to this. And I even heard Matt Rule say in an interview before the game, he said, look, man, I just got fans that want to go to a bowl game. For people who don't know the history, Nebraska hasn't been to a bowl game since 2016, okay? So Matt Rule said it in the pregame interview on NBC. He said, like, there are students that come up to me that say, hey, coach, I came back for another year just because I want to go to the whatever bowl in Phoenix and spend 4 or 5 days in Phoenix in December. But when I look at what is going on with this program, with the Big Ten, with college football, this is going to sound crazy, but tell me why Nebraska, as crazy as it sounds, isn't a college football playoff dark horse. Now, again, speaking of horses, you don't want to put the horse before the cart. I get that. Okay. I'm not anointing anyone, anything, anytime, anywhere. But a couple of things stand out to me about this team. One, they have a style of play that travels, that will have success on the road, at home, cold weather, warm weather, wind, snow, sleet, 80 degrees when they're playing at USC in a few weeks. They take care of the football so far, and they dominate. They have real players on both lines of scrimmage. So that's not flashy. That's not fluky. That is something that should carry with them as they travel throughout the season. Beyond that, speaking of which, let's look at the schedule. Because there was a reason that a lot of people thought Nebraska could be a surprise 8-9 win team this year, and it was because of the schedule. You look at who they play. They're 2-0. They play Northern Iowa this week. You certainly hope they're ready to play. First 4 Big Ten games. Illinois at home, Purdue on the road, Rutgers at Indiana. And so I bring it up because when we talk about a potential for a team to be what? 7-0 going into an Ohio State game later in the year? They could be 7-0. Now, Indiana looks better under Kurt Cignetti. Rutgers looks better. What the point I'm trying to make, they could easily be 7-0 going into that Ohio State game. The back half of the schedule is a little bit tougher because they do have to go to USC. USC all of a sudden looks better than we thought, but it doesn't change the fact that from my perspective, this is a schedule that is tailor-made for 8-9 wins if you just take care of business. Finally, let's just have an honest conversation. Let's look across the rest of the Big Ten right now, because I was a guy that thought, as we just discussed, that Michigan would at least be – Michigan is not good. And so Michigan all of a sudden, I thought they'd be 10-2. They'd go 1-2 against the Texas, Ohio State, Oregon trio, and they'd be 10-2. They make the playoff. Michigan's got a lot of work to do. That does not look like a team that's going to finish 10-2. Oregon right now is a mess. Oregon's got to stop scheduling teams from Idaho because they're giving them all sorts of fits. They nearly lost to Boise, walk-off field goal, struggled with Idaho. They don't look like the team that we thought. Iowa took a loss. Iowa's a team that's been a thorn in Nebraska's side. They already took a loss. Penn State, I'm sorry. James Franklin, every week it's a different story. Dominate West Virginia, struggle with whoever, what were they playing? Bowling Green? I can't even remember. So like all of a sudden you look at this schedule and you look at the Big Ten. You mean to tell me Penn State ain't going to lose somewhere weird? You mean to tell me Oregon looks like we thought they were? Now I will say USC looks better than we thought. And Ohio State is really good. But when I look at this Nebraska situation, I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility to talk playoff. I know the fan base will be happy with a bowl game. I'm not trying to oversell it. But when I look at this team, it feels to me like they could surprise some people and that this is a team that could be and should be and maybe will be in the mix in the Big Ten late in the year. And I think everybody knows the other part of it is this is a 12-team playoff era. 12-team playoff era. You finish 10-2 in the Big Ten, you're probably getting in. So it's fascinating to think about. You don't want to get ahead of yourselves, but congrats to Nebraska fans. You get the dub. By the way, Nebraska fans, if you're still with us, we got our new era, new rule shirt, baby. That is right. That is at aarontorresonline.com/merchandise. So make sure that you go ahead and check those out. aarontorresonline.com/merchandise. You can get that new era, new rules tee. But boy, oh boy, oh boy, what a great day that it was for the Nebraska Cornhuskers. You should be excited because you got yourselves a real football team right now, and you have a lot of reason for enthusiasm going into the back half of the schedule. All right, very quickly, we got to talk about the other side of things. That's the Colorado side. And listen, I am somebody who I have been a defender of Coach Prime. I still, in like a weird way, believe in Coach Prime. But let's also call a spade, and let's just be honest. It is getting harder and harder to defend this team, harder and harder to justify this team, harder and harder to talk yourself into being as good as we thought they were going to be in the preseason. And so let's dive into Colorado. Let's dive into the other side of this stuff because, as I just said, I want to believe in Colorado. I've hoped that this season would be better, that this season would be different. I talked about all offseason the fact that when you go from 1 win to 4, that is a step up. But after you see this game, it's hard to have any positivity about Colorado, and you just wonder, what is the ceiling for this team? Because whatever it is, I think it's a lot lower than maybe even I thought a few weeks ago. In terms of this game, listen, after the North Dakota State game, what I said, and I still sort of believe it, I said there was a positive and a negative coming out of that North Dakota State game. And the negative that I said that O-line ain't fixed. That O-line ain't good enough. And even if you just watch the North Dakota State game, you could see pretty clearly. You sat there and you said, you know what? This team does not look better than it did a year ago. This team is not blocking significantly better than a year ago. And oh, by the way, there were 2 times in that North Dakota State game that they needed a 1-yard run and could not get them. And you sat there and said, well, wait a second now. If you can't get 1 yard against North Dakota State, what are you going to do when you face a much better defensive line full of a bunch of FBS, Power 5, Power 4 conference guys? Well, we found out Saturday, and it wasn't pretty. As I mentioned a minute ago, Colorado finishes this game with a total of 16 yards rushing on 22 attempts. Now, again, we talked about it in the Nebraska side of things. This is a stat that's a little bit skewed. Obviously, sack losses count towards your rushing total. But at the end of the day, your leading rusher had 32 yards. That is not going to get a job done. That's not good enough. And I'm sorry. Shedeur got sacked 6 times. And the one thing we could criticize Colorado for whatever, Shedeur gets rid of the football. This is not a guy that holds onto the ball forever. And he gets sacked 6 times, 10 tackles for loss. This offensive line just isn't good enough. And I don't have the answers. I'm not a coach. I'm not compensated to figure out blocking schemes and whatever. But whatever it is, you looked at this offensive line on paper. You said it should be better. I know Jordan Seaton's a freshman. I know that whatever. But Khalil Benson was a 4-year starter, multi-year starter in the Big Ten. Jordan Seaton was a 5-star. You had other guys coming from Power 5 conferences, and you hoped that it got figured out. It has not. The defense, it's hard for me to really gauge with the defense because bluntly, I'll just be honest, thought they completely showed up unprepared. That first drive, Nebraska runs the ball right down your throat. I'm sorry, that's unacceptable. Same time, you could also look at it and say Nebraska only scored 28 points. Now, again, they let their foot off the gas. They weren't really trying to run up the score, but Shedeur did throw a pick six. And beyond that, there was that weird play, probably inside the 30, inside the goal line that got tipped up in the air. Easily could have been an interception for Colorado. And so with the defense, I'm not quite as down as everybody else. But I also got to admit, Nebraska kind of took their foot off the gas, and that is a large part of, frankly, why the score was, quote-unquote, only 28-10, because I think they could have scored more if they wanted to. The defense, to me, is improved, but not nearly enough, and probably not nearly as much as I thought. And so when I look at this whole thing in the big picture, I do think there's some positives, do think there's some negatives about Colorado. Going to try to be glasses half full and say this. The one thing you can say about Colorado, I don't think that outside of Utah, they are going to play a better team in terms of line play and physicality. Matt Rule has talked about from day one. He's a Penn State guy, Big Ten guy. He is a guy who builds his programs from the inside out. And so when I look at the Colorado schedule, there are challenges. There are games where they will be underdogs. But outside of Utah, I don't see a team that's going to be as tough and as mean and as physical as Nebraska. So if that's your kryptonite, it's kind of good. The schedule breaks kind of nicely. And I'll take it a step further. Big 12, excuse me, not Big 10. Big 10 is great. Big 12 was pretty underwhelming in week 2. Arizona, what a weird team that was. They couldn't be stopped on offense. They couldn't stop anyone on defense in week 1. Week 2, the offense didn't really get going and the defense carried them. Don't know what they're about. Easily could have lost to Northern Arizona. The opposite is true as well. The team that Arizona is playing on Friday night, Kansas State, looked terrible against Tulane. I don't buy them at all. I've never bought into Avery Johnson. I think people love him because he's got long hair. I don't really care. Guy's like a 52% completion percentage guy. You can't win in college football with a guy like that. So I have questions about Kansas State. Kansas lost to Illinois. Oklahoma State should have lost to Arkansas. So you've got a little bit of hope, but at some point it can't just be hope. You actually have to capitalize and take advantage of what is on the field. And so when I look at this team, it's just hard for me to get excited because you see all the individual pieces. You see that they should be better than they are, but they just haven't proven it yet right now in college football. They just haven't proven it yet. I get it. They started 4-2 last year. We were all excited about it, but they finished 0-8 last year, or I guess it would have been 0-6 last year. They're 1-1 this year. They struggled against North Dakota State. And again, I look at the offensive line should be better. It isn't. The defensive line is better, but is it going to be good enough? The secondary should be better. We'll see, whatever. But I want to quote Coach Prime. I know Coach Prime believes, I want to believe, and I think the schedule is still there to get things figured out. Now, if you're looking for a positive, this was kind of surprising to me. Colorado is actually like an 8-point favorite this weekend at Colorado State. No, Colorado State got beat up good against Texas 2 weeks ago. Texas, as I just said, might be the best team in college football. So that's a little bit surprising to me. But if you look at that, Colorado State is a game you should win. Central Florida is going to be an interesting one. You got to fly across country. There's obviously going to be a climate change. And you could look at the UCF game as a positive or a negative after that. Or you play Baylor, that's a game you got to win. You're at home. Baylor, I don't believe, is very good. You have to win that game. You get to 3-1, all of a sudden, people start saying, you know what? Maybe this team isn't as bad as we thought. The Central Florida game I just mentioned, the end of September, that's an interesting game from this perspective, is because Central Florida is coming off a bye in that game, but they are also playing at Florida the week after. So they'll be rested. But the counter to that is kind of like, you know what? They might be looking ahead to Florida. So I could go on and on, but as I keep saying, I don't think this team is as bad as they looked on Saturday against Nebraska. But at some point, whoever it is, me, anyone in the media, the coaching staff, Coach Prime, like one thing I'll say really quick, because I know I'm going long here, I want to get to some other stuff. One thing I give Coach Prime credit for, like he owned it in the locker room. Like he has not given up on this team. I watched some of the stuff that his son put out on Well Off Media's social media page. And it's like Coach Prime is just saying, we got to get better. We got to figure this out. We can't keep making the same mistakes. We can't keep beating ourselves. So I don't know what else there is to say. I want to believe. I like Coach Prime. I believe in his mission. I believe he wants to help young men. I believe he's in it for the right reasons. But at the end of the day, this is a sport and a career defined by wins and losses. And Colorado's taken just too many of them. Before we do, many of you ask me all the time, Torres, what can I do to help support the show? You give me hours and hours and hours of content every single week. What can I do to help you? Well, I'll tell you what, do me a quick favor. Check out the Aaron Torres Media merchandise store for all of your team-specific shirts, hats, and more, all available at aarontorresonline.com/merchandise. A lot of you wondering, Torres, what can I get in that merch store? Well, first of all, we got our brand new Hope and Pope Kentucky basketball t-shirts. That's right. Mark Pope has arrived. He is here to save the day. Get your Hope and Pope t-shirts there. Also, Arkansas fans, the Big Pig Invasion is here. You can get your tees there. Basketball School Alabama shirts. Mora Hurley 2024 UConn shirts for your tailgates at Rentschler Field, your games at the XL Center or Gamble. And oh, by the way, your Mike effing Woodson gear for Indiana. If you love football, we got you covered too. We got more Dion shirts and hats than we even know what to do with. The freeze warning has hit the plains. Auburn fans, grab your freeze warning tees now. And of course, our new era, new rules shirt applies to Nebraska football and its incredible fan base. We have more coming for the fall, plenty in stock right now. So make sure to check out the Aaron Torres Media merch store at aarontorresonline.com/merchandise. And you can always hit me up with any questions. Aaron Torres Podcast Questions @gmail.com. All right, everybody. I'm back. Gonna be back. So in true Torres fashion, we are running long, so I will try to be quick here. But boy, oh boy, what an interesting week it was in the SEC. It was almost like Goldilocks and the Three Bears. You had one, taking out Texas, we already talked about them. You had one team that looked really good. You had a bunch of teams that looked really bad, and you had one right in the middle that wasn't bad, but wasn't good, but got the win. But are there concerns? So we'll talk about everything here in just a minute. But to me, the place to start in the SEC conversation outside of Texas, it is the Tennessee Volunteers. And if you listen to this show, listen, I like Tennessee coming into the year. They're coming off a solid season a year ago. Josh Heupel, to me, coming into this season, had established himself as a very good college football coach, a guy that is elevating Tennessee. And there was obviously so much excitement in the offseason. You get not one, but two elite quarterback commitments, one in the class of 25, one in the class of 26. You get the number one offensive tackle in America, David Sanders, committed. And so it's just obvious the momentum in this program is heading in the right direction. But there are a lot of programs that pick up momentum in the offseason, and the question is, what happens when you take the field in September? Well, in the case of Tennessee, the momentum is only picking up steam as they are now 2-0, two dominant wins, including what I think you have to consider right up there with Texas as the best win of the weekend as they head down to Charlotte, neutral field, NC State, a game that Tennessee fans were maybe a little worried about coming into the season. Yeah, nothing to fear. Never fear when Nico is here, baby. That is right. Tennessee takes care of business, 52-10. And here's the crazy part. Nico was really good, but so was literally every other part of that football team. And I'm here to tell you, I really look at Tennessee and I sit there and say, this is the most underrated team in college football. And I think they are a team that is not only going to be in the mix for the playoff. If I had to put together a 12-team bracket right now, they are in because they are underrated and they are going to continue to prove it over the course of the season. And so looking at NC State, listen, it all starts with Nico. I'm going to try the name again. Tried it on Wednesday's show. Got killed by Tennessee fans. Is it Nico Iamaleava? Iamaleava, whatever it is. The kid is incredible. Every time I say it, I get it wrong. Tennessee fans yell at me. I know how good the kid is. And on Saturday evening, the kid was awesome. 16 of 23 passing, 211 yards, 2 touchdowns. But here's the crazy part. He had 2 interceptions. I don't really care about those because one of them, his hand got hit, popped in the air, pick 6 the other way. But beyond that, what I loved is the poise and confidence. We talked about it a little bit with Dylan Raiola a minute ago. It's not always the big flashy plays. It's not always the 70-yard pass downfield. What it often is, however, is how do you handle adversity? How do you come back when your back is against the wall, when people are frustrated, when you just made a bad play, when you're frustrated with yourself? And Nico was awesome. But to me, the story isn't really about Nico. It's about everybody else because Nico's going to get the headlines. Nico's going to be talked about because he's a future first-round NFL draft pick at the quarterback position for Tennessee. But what impresses me about that Tennessee win, look at everybody else in this game. First of all, Dylan Sampson, if you do not know the name, listen, I'm not saying this is like a Leinart Reggie Bush situation. It would not stun me to see both these guys, both Nico and Dylan Sampson, later in the year in New York for the Heisman Trophy ceremony. I know we're getting ahead of ourselves, but this kid has been phenomenal. 20 carries, 132 yards, 6.5 yards per carry, 2 touchdowns. As a team, Tennessee finishes with 249 yards rushing. And this is the second straight 100 rushing yard game for Dylan Sampson. And this is the second game where Tennessee has finished with 240 plus yards rushing. They had 300 yards rushing against Chattanooga last week. And when I look at Tennessee, that's part of what stands out. And this reminds me of a lot of what we talked about last year. A lot of last year, you go back 2 seasons ago, you have success with Hendon Hooker. Everybody thinks all Tennessee does is they just throw the ball around the field 60 times a game. 1, that's not what they did with Hendon Hooker. But 2, last year, you had Joe Milton. It's no disrespect. We know his strengths. We know his weaknesses. We know his limitations. And all Josh Heupel did was say, you know what? We can't be a team that is defined by our quarterback. We have to be a team that runs the football effectively and plays field position, ball control offense. Well, what ends up happening? Tennessee last year leads the SEC in rushing. Tennessee last year has one of the best defenses in the SEC. And they managed to win games despite the offensive deficiency at quarterback. Well, fast forward. We already talked about Nico. We talked about the run game. We know how good the wide receivers are. Here's the crazy part. How about this? The fact that Tennessee's defense is elite as well. 51-10 is a final score. Looks good enough on paper. Do you know that Tennessee finished this game giving up, are you ready for this? Take a guess. Just take a wild stab. They put up 51 points. NC State scores 10 points. They must have given up probably, 250 yards or whatever. No big deal. How about this? 143 yards of total offense for NC State. This is a team. Grayson McCall was one of the most coveted transfers in the portal at quarterback. By the way, this is a team that put up 38 points, in their season opener against Western Carolina. This is a team that was picked by many to compete at the top of the ACC. 143 points. And here's the other thing. I mentioned it a minute ago. NC State had a pick 6 for a touchdown. Not great at math, but if they scored 10 points, 7 of them came on defense. It means that the 7 came on from the NC State defense, which means that the Tennessee defense did not let NC State into the end zone, okay? So this was a complete effort. This was a dominant effort, and it speaks to what I said a minute ago. I think there's this perception outside Tennessee. It's just this fun offense that's kind of cute, and they put up 60 at Alabama a few years ago, and it's cool, but let's see what happens when they play real teams. Well, they played a real team on Saturday, and that real team had no answers on offense or defense. And when I look at this Tennessee team, I don't just think they're good. I think they're one of the more complete teams that I have seen in college football this year. And I think they are a team that is built to have high-level success all season long. Now, listen, I'm not going to do what everybody else is going to do in mid-September and start going through the schedule and say, well, this is definitely a win, and that's definitely a win, and what about that, and what about this, and that's going to be a 50-point blowout. Listen, it's the SEC. Every game is tough. You got Oklahoma on the road in a few weeks. By the way, I don't think Arkansas is a pushover in a few weeks, but I just bring it up because there is just so much optimism about this team, and to me, it not only starts with the quarterback, but I think what is important to note, it starts with the quarterback, but it's not just the quarterback. In other words, there are a lot of good players on this team. They can run the football. They can defend. They can beat you low scoring. They can beat you high scoring. They put up 51 points. That defense, by the way, here's a crazy stat, has not given up a defensive touchdown, has not given up a touchdown in 3 straight games. 0 points against Iowa, 3 points against Chattanooga, 10 points against NC State when NC State only scored on defense. I love this Tennessee team. Be excited, Vols fans. There is a lot to be excited about, and it ain't slowing down with Nico, with the recruiting, and with the roster that you have. Josh Heupel is that dude. I think Josh Heupel is as good as any coach right now going pretty much in all of college football. I'm not going to compare him to Kirby, but you get the point. Elite coach. Tennessee fans, you are just so lucky to have him. So I mentioned Tennessee is awesome. What I did also mention, there were a couple other teams that there were some concerns, if not outright terrible losses on Saturday afternoon. Do want to start with a team that got a win. And it's not a win and a score that if you looked at it, you would say, well, why would Torres talk about that? Why would there be concern there? I want to talk about the Alabama Crimson Tide. Because on paper, Alabama won 42-16, and I'm sure there are some of you sitting there saying, Torres, how the heck are you going to sit there and say there's reason to panic if you're an Alabama fan? Well, I'm not even saying Alabama fans are going to panic, but what I will warn you, do not look at that final score and assume that it was an Alabama blowout. How about this? Alabama was up 14-13 in the fourth quarter. How about this? Going into the fourth quarter, they were up 14-13. Then it was 21-16 with under 7 minutes to go. They reeled off 3 straight touchdowns in that game to get that win. 21-16, middle of the fourth quarter. They survive. They advance. But I think it is worth asking, how worried should you be if you're an Alabama fan? Well, listen, it was not pretty, and there are some things that we got to talk about. First of all, 13 penalties for Alabama, 120 yards of penalty yardage. And on top of it, 3 turnovers. That's not acceptable, period, end of story. But let me also defend Alabama here for half a second, and Kalen DeBoer talked about this after the game. Of the 13 penalties committed, 8 of them were by the offensive line. Here's why that matters. It is because the offensive line right now is a major work in progress. It's not a knock on the guys on the field, but here's what you need to know about that Alabama offense. That Alabama offensive line, Caden Proctor, former 5-star, starter at tackle, hurts his shoulder before the first game, has not played yet. Elijah Pritchett, the other offensive tackle, gets hurt, does not play to start this game. You have Tyler Booker, a guy who has played guard, I believe, his entire Alabama career, goes over and makes his first career start at tackle. So you want to know where 13 penalties comes from a a team that just isn't penalized that much. That's where it comes from, and that's why I wouldn't be too worried about if I was an Alabama fan. Now, it's got to get cleaned up. Just talked about how good Tennessee is. We know Georgia's coming to town in a few weeks. We know you're going to Wisconsin next week. So you have to figure things out, and it has to get better. Beyond that, a couple things that I do think are positives as well and why I wouldn't be as concerned. You were able to run the ball effectively. Now, I know it's only South Florida. Not saying the defensive line is what you're going to see with Georgia or maybe Texas in the SEC championship game. We have a little lighting issue here. I apologize. But I'm not saying it's what the best off. Where was I? It's not that I'm saying that it's the best defensive line that you are going to see in college football when you do play South Florida. But at the same time, to your credit, you did rush for 200 yards. You did rush for 5 yards per carry. Jam Miller was awesome. 140 yards rushing, 15 carries in that game. Now, could be mistaken. I believe he did have a fumble, which obviously you want to get cleaned up. But to me, when I look at this Alabama thing, I just think you got to get healthy. I think you got to get healthy. I think you got to get more confident in the passing game. I think also, by the way, if you're looking for a positive from Alabama, Ryan Williams just continues to be a star. For people who don't know the Ryan Williams story, this is, how about this? The youngest player in college football at just 17 years old. Well, in week 1, first of all, he was a 5-star, could have gone to Auburn, was committed to Bama, decommits when Saban retires, then recommits to Alabama. This is a big recruiting win for Kalen DeBoer and a guy that he absolutely needs, because last week, 2 catches, 2 touchdowns in the opening win against Western Kentucky. This week, 4 catches, including the touchdown that really broke open the game. So listen, this isn't perfect. You got to get better week over week over week. And I think I know we're going to make fun of Wisconsin, because Wisconsin has not been good through the first 2 weeks of this season. But that is going to be a tough environment that you're going into. Wisconsin is 2-0. They are winning games. It isn't necessarily pretty, but they're getting the job done. And so you cannot take that game for granted. I know you're not. Obviously, from there, you will get a bye before you host Georgia. So this stuff does have to get cleaned up. And I do think that there are reasons for concern. Same time, I'm not going to panic just yet, because when I look at this Alabama team, I think there are a lot of positives. And I think the number one thing, you have to get that O-line healthy before you go into the heart of SEC play. Before we get out of here, let's go ahead and wrap with just a couple negative notes on the SEC. And to those of you, for some of these other fan bases, I don't know what else to say other than I am just so sorry. I am just so sorry. Let's start with a game in Lexington, Kentucky. By the way, if you missed it, we did a full reaction video on Saturday afternoon after Kentucky just got mollywopped by South Carolina. Final score 31-6 in a game that Kentucky opened as a 10.5-point favorite in this game, okay? So here's the crazy part. My college football best bets went 4-1 on Saturday. The only loss, I had Kentucky winning this game a lot to a little, and it ended up being a lot to a little. It was just on the South Carolina side much more than the Kentucky side. Now, when you look at this game, a couple things stand out. First of all, let's give South Carolina credit, but the one thing that I will not do, and South Carolina fans got mad at me on Saturday afternoon, I don't think South Carolina is some amazing team, and we have to recalibrate everything that we thought about South Carolina coming into the season. They were picked to finish 13th in the SEC. That feels about right. And also, they almost lost to Old Dominion in week 1. They played Old Dominion in week 1. They had under 300 yards of total offense. Old Dominion outgained them. And if it wasn't for 4 turnovers by Old Dominion, they could have easily and probably should have lost that game. Now, part of the turnover stuff, that's a credit to ODU. I'm not trying, or a credit to South Carolina's defense. But I just refuse to sit there and say, oh, that South Carolina is some world beater. Now, they're clearly better than Kentucky. But at the same time, I'm not going to sit here and say that Kentucky, that this is some amazing win for South Carolina. I just think Kentucky is really not a very good football team right now. With Kentucky, listen, it starts, I don't even know what to say, man. We talked about it a lot on Saturday. Again, you can go back and listen to that full clip, but it starts with the O-line. Listen, by the way, first time ever, I've been accused of being in cahoots with an O-line coach. Some Kentucky fan was like, well, if the O-line coach Wofford wasn't your buddy, maybe you'd go after him. I'm like, I don't know the guy. I have no idea who it is. I mean, I know who it is. He was the former Bama O-line coach, whatever. Don't know the guy. No excuses. That offensive line was terrible. And because of it, Brock Vandagriff had no chance. Now, I don't know if Brock Vandagriff is good. Finished 3 of 10 passing, What I do know is it's hard to do much of anything when the O-line ain't protecting you at all. So 3 of 10 passing. And let me just say this. I think this was a turning point and a breaking point for Mark Stoops. I had a lot of Kentucky fans reach out to me and mention this to me, is that when you look at the Mark Stoops era, listen, this was a guy that almost left for Texas A&M last year. Now, Texas A&M fans are like, dude, we dodged a bullet with this one. But I just bring it up because it just feels like you do wonder if this era, as good as it has been at times, I always say Mark Stoops is the best coach Kentucky has ever had. If it just be best, almost like a Calipari, to start over, start fresh with somebody else. Yes, the name that every Kentucky fan wants is John Summerall, who is the head coach of Tulane, who obviously has ties to the UK program as well. But to me, this is on Mark Stoops, because at the end of the day, Mark Stoops is the guy, and we have talked about it. He complains about NIL. He whines about NIL. He says, I spend too much time raising funds, not enough time around my football team. And it's like, well, dude, at a certain point, okay, but you got to go deliver when it's time for you to actually step on the field. And so with Mark Stoops, again, best coach Kentucky has ever had in my lifetime, doesn't change the fact that at some point you got to be better than you have been. So we discussed it at length. I don't really know what else there is to add. It is so frustrating. It is so disappointing because it feels like the same old for Kentucky. And oh, by the way, I think it's also worth noting, all of a sudden that schedule is just really, really, really tough. I still think Kentucky gets to bowl eligibility, but you got Georgia coming to town next week. You still got Ole Miss before the end of September. And then some of the games later in the year at Tennessee, at Texas. Good luck with that. Louisville looks good, whatever. So you got to win a lot of those coin toss games to get to 500, to get to bowl eligibility. You better beat Auburn at home. You better beat Vandy. You better probably win against South Carolina in the Swamp, a team that you have at least had a lot of success against in recent history. So again, very frustrating effort from Kentucky. Very frustrating effort, by the way, from another team that we talked about on Saturday. We did a reaction video to Arkansas. Arkansas had a 14-0 lead. What were they up? 21-7 in the second quarter. And they were in complete control against Oklahoma State. By the way, how about this as a crazy stat? Arkansas in this game, this is wild, okay? Arkansas finished this game with 648 yards total offense. Oklahoma State, 385 yards. And Oklahoma State finds a way to win after Arkansas was up 21-7. Bottom line, too many turnovers, too many self-inflicted problems. There was a muffed punt that led directly to points for Oklahoma State. There was a pick six, even though Taylon Green was awesome in this game. And if you're Arkansas, it's just devastating for all of the obvious reasons. There are no gimmies on this schedule really going forward. Maybe UAB this weekend, but that's about it. But if you win this game, now all of a sudden you're feeling good about the rest of the schedule. It's not easy, but you start looking at some of those coin toss games. A&M on a neutral field, that's a game maybe you feel better about. Auburn, we've talked about how tough it is to win there. It ain't tough for the Cal Golden Bears, who we're going to talk about in a second. And you start figuring out a pathway to bowl eligibility, and maybe we're a little bit better than we thought. Instead, another game where there's frustration, another game that you can't close out when you should. That has been a Sam Pittman hallmark. Not saying it's all his fault. Players got to hold on to the football. Players got to perform. Players can't make mistakes late in games. But that is a crushing loss for the Arkansas Razorbacks. Finally, really quickly, just mention it. We're an hour 10 into this show, so I'll be quick on this one for the sake of producer Matt. For people who don't know, producer Matt is an Auburn Tigers alum. He was at the game at Jordan-Hare Stadium on Saturday afternoon as the Auburn Tigers fall to the Cal Golden Bears 21-14 at home. Don't know if ACC chants rang out throughout the stadium at Jordan-Hare, but they get the victory. What a game for Cal. Story, though, as great as it is for Cal, the real story is Auburn, right? And Auburn finishes this game 286 yards, 165 yards passing. And listen, it's just confirmation what we already knew. Peyton Thorne is not an SEC quarterback. It's not a surprise. It's not a secret. He finishes 14 of 27, 4 interceptions. Just insane and just not good enough. And it's funny. It's interesting, right? I talked to producer Matt about this during the summer is, listen, we've had Hugh Freeze on this show a few times. Love Coach Freeze. He's always been great to me. One thing about Coach Freeze does not shy from media opportunities and promoting his programs, nor should he. When you have a team that's playing well, like he had at Liberty, last year Auburn was going really well. But I bring it up because it felt like a quiet offseason for Coach Freeze. Felt like he didn't do a lot of outside interviews. Felt like a lot of the conversation was about his 2024 recruiting class led by Cam Coleman. Really good, really, really, really good wide receiver and a solid class overall. And then 2025, they are off to this insane start. We've talked about it on this show. I think it's 9 of the top 10 players in the state of Alabama are currently committed to Auburn, according to 24/7 Sports. And right now, Auburn has a top 5 class in college football with what they're doing. By the way, it's 8 out of the top 10. Alabama was 0. But what I said about Hugh Freeze, it just felt like all of the conversation was about the recruiting and next year and the year after. And I really did wonder, did he kind of know, what? I probably don't got a very good football team right now, and I probably need to change the narrative and get positivity going about the recruiting because the on-the-field product might struggle this year. So Auburn loses to Cal, and it's really, honestly, it's no different, right? It's no different than Arkansas. It's no different than Kentucky. Is that this was just a game that you had chalked up as a win at home against an ACC school. Now, all of a sudden, you look at the schedule. It's hard to find guaranteed wins in the SEC. Vandy, maybe. Obviously, you still have 2 non-con games, so you want to take care of business against New Mexico and against UL Monroe. But Kentucky on the road, probably after you saw Kentucky lose, felt like it was a win. Then you see your own team struggles, and it's a coin flip. Oklahoma, kind of a weird spot. You catch them right after they play Tennessee at home. Maybe if you sneak them there. I don't know. Arkansas, the same. So I could go on and on. But I just felt like there was something weird all offseason with Hugh Freeze. Not from he's doing anything wrong, but from the perspective of, is he trying to hide talking about his team? And I think there might be something to it. All right. Tell you what. We have gone on for long enough, an hour on a Sunday here, and boy, oh boy, do I appreciate your guys' support. If you are not subscribed to the Aaron Torres Sports Podcast, please make sure to do so. Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, Google Music, wherever you listen to podcasts, make sure that you are subscribed. Also, make sure to rate and review the show. Go ahead and give us a quick 5 stars. Let us know what you like, what you don't like, all that good stuff. Make sure you're following on social media, at Aaron_Torres on Twitter, at Aaron Torres Pod on Instagram, Aaron Torres Podcast Questions at gmail.com, Aaron Torres Podcast Questions at gmail.com. We will be back on Tuesday night, but it is time for me to get out of here. Shout out to Torrent Craig. Shout out to Rachel, who hates my voice. Shout out to JJ Redick. You F-head, unblock me, bro. I will be back.